Hey students, in this video we're going to be talking about the spending multiplier, the tax multiplier, and the money multiplier. We're going to look at the spending multiplier first. Remember that this is reliant on the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. The spending multiplier is expressed with this formula. This formula allows us to find out how much an increase of spending will have on the economy with each $1 spent. Here's an example. Let's say the government increases the purchases of goods and services by $50 billion. Assume that the MPC is 0.5. How much would this increase GDP? We have two factors that allows us to answer the question, the MPC and the amount of spending that is increased. Remember that the government is part of the aggregate demand curve and is part of GDP. We will go over the effects in just a moment. Your equation should look like this. 1 divided by 0.5 gives us 2. We now have 50 billion times 2 giving us 100 billion. That means that the change in GDP will be $100 billion. This translates to movement on the aggregate demand curve as well. Since it is in the positive, it will move to the right. This is how we calculate the effects of fiscal policy with the increase of the purchases of goods and services. Let's apply this concept with the aggregate supply and demand model. Here we have aggregate demand and supply model. We can see that it is a recessionary gap of 30 billion. Assume Congress decides to increase purchases of goods and services, and that MPC is 0.5. How much do they need to increase in spending? The final outcome we want is $30 billion, so your equation should look like this. So now applying algebra that you learned with Miss A, we will need to find x. 1 over 0.5 gives us 2. So now we have 30 billion equals x times 2. Divide the 2 and find out that Congress needs to increase by 15 billion. This also works with inflationary gaps. You just need to add a negative to find how much Congress has to spend less. Okay, so spending multiplier, pretty easy to apply to the aggregate demand and supply model. Now let's take a look at the tax multiplier. The tax multiplier allows us to see how an increase or decrease in taxation will impact the economy. This is the tax multiplier. The answer should come out to be a negative if it is an increase in taxes. This is because it takes away citizens' ability to spend parts of their income. If you get a positive when the question has an increase in taxes, you need to double check your work. You should get a positive if it is a decrease in taxation. Remember, you're looking at the impact on GDP. Let's say that Congress increases taxes by $10 billion and MPC is 0.25. Your equation should look like this. Negative 0.25 divided by 0.75 is negative 1 over 3, or 0.3 continuously. 10 billion times negative 1 over 3 is negative $3.33 billion, and that is the effect that it will have on the economy. Now let's say we have an inflationary economy of $30 billion. Assume that your MPC is 0.75. Congress decides to increase taxes. Your equation should look like this. Applying the same concepts from the spending multiplier, you should have solved x to be $10 billion. Now let's say it is a recessionary gap of $30 billion at the same MPC and Congress decreases taxes. The answer should be negative $10 billion. We talked about how banks lend out money of their excess reserves and then have their reserve requirements. We're now going to apply the money multiplier to calculate how much money has been added to the money supply. So let's take a look at a bank T account. From this T account, we can calculate the reserve ratio. We can see that the bank is loaned out, meaning no money is left in the excess reserves. And this tells us what is the reserve ratio. Because it is loaned out, we can assume that the bank just needs to keep $500 in reserves. We also see that all the liabilities the bank has on the right, with these numbers we can tell that the reserve ratio is 10%. Now we can use the money multiplier. The money multiplier formula is this. Now, the way to apply the money multiplier is to multiply the new amount of money being introduced to the economy. For this problem, it is $4,500. So your equation should look like this. This will tell us how much money is added to the money supply. Your answer should be $45,000. The reason behind this is that when you loan out that $4,500, that person that received the loan will either spend it or save it. Therefore, their bank will receive the money, loan it out, and repeat the process. Alright students, I hope that helped you with the multipliers. We will go over some practice problems in class. Until then, please wash your hands, do not touch your face, and stay inside.